You know that feeling.
Right.
When you really want to grasp something, dig deep.
Yeah, get to the heart of it.
That's exactly what we're aiming for today. We're taking a deep dive into, well, the engine behind global mission, why it's presented as something completely certain.
And also facing up to the real costs involved. It's not always easy.
Definitely not. Our source material for this, it's excerpts from Doing Missions When Dying is Gain, a book that really tackles the purpose and, frankly, the demands of this whole thing head on.
Right. And our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, it's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
We want to unpack the core arguments from the text. Why this certainty? What's the real nature of this mission, according to the author?
And hopefully offer some insights that resonate, whether you're already involved, just curious, or maybe looking for a sense of purchase yourself.
Exactly. It should be relevant, whatever your background.
Okay, let's jump in. Point one, this idea of the unfailing mission. The book kicks off with a pretty powerful mission statement used by one church. We exist to spread a passion for the supremacy of God in all things, for the joy of all peoples through Jesus Christ.
That's a mouthful, but it's packed, isn't it?
It really is. But the author insists this isn't just like a hopeful goal. It's a mission that will succeed. So what's the basis for that confidence?
Well, the first big reason given is Jesus' own words. Matthew 24:14 says, "This gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come."
Right. All nations.
And the book clarifies that nations here isn't necessarily talking about, modern political countries.
Okay.
It's more about distinct ethno-linguistic groups, peoples with their own languages, their own cultures all across the globe.
Got it. So the certainty comes from the promise itself.
Exactly. Jesus says it will happen, not maybe, not might, will. So despite all the complexities we see, the spread of this message is framed as a guaranteed outcome.
A promise, not just a possibility. And the text is pretty blunt about the implications for us, isn't it?
It really is. It lays out two stark choices.
Which are?
You either actively participate in this inevitable triumph,
Yeah.
or, well, you kind of waste your life by opting out. There's no middle ground presented.
No fence-sitting allowed. Okay. What's the second reason for this certainty?
The second reason is this idea of the ransom, the price paid by Jesus' blood.
Okay, the ransom.
Revelation 5, verses 9 and 10. It talks about Christ being slain and purchasing people for God by his blood.
Purchasing them.
Yes, from every tribe and language and people and nation. The argument is it's a done deal. The purchase is complete. These people have been bought.
So God will ensure the purchase is realized.
Absolutely. That's the core idea. It paints this picture of incredible future diversity, all united.
That reminds me of that really intense story about the two Moravian missionaries.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible story.
They were heading to the West Indies, right? And they actually sold themselves into slavery to get there.
Willing to give up everything, knowing they might never come back. And as the ship left, their prayer was, what was it?
May the Lamb receive the reward of his suffering.
Wow. Just, wow. That level of conviction.
And what's key there is their belief. They believed Christ had already bought those people.
Right. They weren't going to try to save them, but to find those already purchased.
Exactly. Trusting God would draw them through the message. It connects to what Jesus said about lost sheep finding his own, John 11.
So God is actively gathering them.
That's the perspective. Okay, third reason for certainty.
Yeah, what's number 3?
It's tied to the glory of God itself.
God's glory. How does that connect?
The book points to Romans 15, verses 8 and 9, and explains that Christ became a servant to the Jewish people,
Okay.
partly so that the Gentiles, the non-Jewish peoples, might glorify God for his mercy.
So reaching everyone was part of the plan to bring God glory from the start.
Precisely. The Great Commission, this mission, isn't just about saving individuals. It's about God's own glory being recognized among all peoples.
That makes sense.
And there's that personal story shared from Bethlehem Baptist Church back in '83.
Right, the electric moment.
Yeah. It wasn't some strategic planning session that shifted their focus to missions. It was this sudden, deep realization about God's glory, sparked by, of all things, a John Michael Talbot album.
Really?
Yeah. And it led to the question, what can we do? How can our church become a launching pad? It all flowed from wanting to see God glorified.
So passion for God's glory fuels the mission.
That's the connection the author makes.
Okay, and the final reason for certainty, you see that we're 4.
The final one is God's sovereignty, his ultimate control over everything.
Sovereignty, okay. How does that play out?
They reference Hebrews chapter 6, verses 1 to 3, and specifically this little phrase, If God permits.
If God permits. That sounds almost like it introduces uncertainty, doesn't it?
You'd think so on the surface, but the interpretation offered is different.
Also,
The implication drawn is that even our own spiritual growth, becoming mature believers, ultimately depends on God permitting it. It highlights God's active control.
so even our own progress isn't entirely up to us.
Right. It underscores his sovereignty, not just in world events, but in the life of the church, in our own lives. The author mentions this realization hitting the congregation, this deep silence,
Yeah.
as they grasp that even our spiritual journey isn't solely our achievement. It's about trusting his hand, even when things seem confusing.
Which leads into that incredibly difficult story about Jim Elliot.
Yes. And the other missionaries killed in Ecuador by the Waodani tribe.
Such a tragic event. But then his son, Steve Saint, reflecting on it later.
He said something really staggering. He called the killings an anomaly that I cannot explain outside of divine intervention.
Which led him to that conclusion.
God killed my dad.
Yeah.
It's a profound, almost unsettling way to view God's sovereignty in tragedy.
It really is. How does the text connect that further?
It links it to Revelation 6, verses 10 and 11. The martyrs under the altar, waiting.
Waiting for what?
Waiting for the full number of their fellow servants, those who are to be killed as they had been, to be completed.
Wow. So the idea is God has a sovereign plan, even in suffering and martyrdom.
Exactly. It encompasses both the victories and the deep suffering. It's all, ultimately, in his hands.
That's a heady concept. And it brings us right to the next point, doesn't it? The price.
Yes. The cost involved is suffering.
The author doesn't shy away from this, points out the rising hostility globally, and really challenges the Western idea of closed countries. Says that if you look at the Apostle Paul's life.
Right. Paul didn't seem to recognize any closed countries. He went where he felt called, despite the danger.
There's a stark contrast drawn, isn't there, between concerns for safety, maybe especially for our kids in some places.
And the reality faced by believers elsewhere. The example used is Sudan.
Yeah, with tragically high numbers of martyrs. It forces a hard look at priorities.
The author is quite blunt about being weary of, potential missionaries putting comfort first.
It's a critique of a comfort-driven faith, really.
Definitely. And that story from YWAM India.
Oh, that one was intense.
Right.
Surrounded by a mob with machetes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the team leader telling them, we're not leaving. They chose to stay.
That's the opposite of self-preservation.
It completely reverses those priorities. It makes Jesus' words in Matthew 16.24
Deny yourselves, take up your cross.
feel incredibly real and costly.
Yeah. And the contrast with the frontier's missionaries in Amsterdam.
Getting daily updates of persecution, someone stabbed, arrests.
And yet preparing to go back.
Ready to go back. It shows this radical commitment. And the author's line,
Golgotha is not a suburb of Jerusalem.
powerful, isn't it? Following Christ authentically means going outside the camp, as Hebrews says, potentially into suffering.
Okay, but then the argument takes another turn, which I found really intriguing.
What's that?
That suffering isn't just the price you pay. It's actually a means of accomplishing the mission.
Ah, yes. Colossians 1.24.
Right. Paul says, I rejoice in my sufferings for your sake, and in my flesh I am filling up what is lacking in Christ's afflictions for the sake of his body, that is, the church.
That phrase, filling up what is lacking in Christ's afflictions, can be confusing.
It really can.
Yeah.
What does it mean? Doesn't mean Jesus' sacrifice wasn't enough, does it?
Absolutely not. That's crucial. His atoning work is complete, perfect, sufficient.
So what's lacking?
Think of it like this. The presentation of those afflictions. Jesus suffered uniquely on the cross, but the world needs to see that suffering made personal, made visible.
Okay, how?
The author uses Philippians 2.30 about Epaphroditus. Paul says he risked his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me.
What was lacking in their service?
Well, one commentary suggests the Philippians sent a gift, money, probably. But a gift needs delivering. It needs personal care, presence. Epaphroditus provided that personal element at great risk.
Ah, okay. So the gift itself was fine, but the personal delivery, the embodiment of the care, was what Epaphroditus supplied.
Exactly. Now apply that back to Colossians 1.24. Christ's suffering, his sacrifice, needs to be presented personally to the nations.
Through our suffering.
Through the sufferings of his people.
Mm-hmm.
Christ intends for the Great Commission to be a presentation to the nations of the sufferings of his cross through the sufferings of his people. Our willingness to endure hardship for the gospel demonstrates the reality and cost of Christ's love.
That makes the story of the evangelist in India make so much more sense.
The one with the blistered feet.
Yeah. Rejected at first. But then the villagers see his feet, the evidence of his sacrifice to reach them.
And they listened, because they saw the cost embodied in him.
That is filling up what was lacking not in the atonement, but in its presentation.
Precisely. It's showing the worth of the message through personal cost.
It also ties into this idea of not quitting, even when you're older.
Right. The examples given are quite something. J. Oswald Sanders.
Writing a book a year since he turned 70, like 18 books after retirement age.
Incredible productivity and dedication.
And then Raymond Lull, in his 80s.
Going to preach in Algeria, knowing it would likely mean death.
That's just a different level of commitment than thinking about, early retirement.
It challenges that whole concept, and the author shares that personal story about his own father.
After the terrible accident in Israel that killed his wife?
Yes, near fatal for him too. But his immediate reaction was, God must have a purpose for me.
And then this explosion of global ministry in his late 70s and 80s.
Reaching 60 nations with his teaching, it shows purpose doesn't have an age limit.
But facing all of this, the certainty, the cost, the call to suffer, even the call to keep going, it can feel overwhelming. Like, am I equipped for this?
Absolutely. It's natural to feel unprepared for such intensity. The author acknowledges this by bringing up the history of persecution.
Like in 17th century Japan.
Yes. Stephen Neal's history book describes horrific things, crucifixions, drownings, just brutal suppression.
It's hard to even imagine enduring that.
And the point is, nobody is inherently equipped. You don't have some personal reservoir of strength for that.
So where does the strength come from?
Hebrews chapter 10, verses 32 to 34. That's presented as the key.
Okay, Hebrews 10. What does it say?
It tells the readers to remember their past suffering, how they had compassion on prisoners, and how they joyfully accepted the plundering of your property.
Joyfully accepted. Being plundered, that's the phrase that jumps out.
It's radical, isn't it? Imagine people coming back from visiting persecuted friends in prison to find their own homes ransacked.
And rejoicing.
That's the core question. How could they react that way? And how do we react to much smaller losses or inconveniences when we're trying to serve?
Yeah, the author's personal example, wanting to react to vandalism, not with anger, but concern for the person who did it.
That's aiming for that same mindset, isn't it?
So what was the key for those early believers? How could they rejoice amidst loss?
The verse tells us, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one.
Their focus wasn't on what they were losing here and now.
Exactly. Their hope was fixed on a future eternal reward. That knowledge fueled their present courage and even joy.
It all comes back to perspective.
Yeah.
And trusting God's promises.
Yes. Promises like Hebrews 13.5, I will never leave you nor forsake you.
Which leads to that confidence in the next verse.
The Lord is my helper, I will not fear. What can man do to me?
Even if man does the worst, like martyrdom.
Even then, it's acknowledged as a reality, but not the ultimate defeat. Romans 8 makes that incredibly clear.
Right, verses 35 to 39. Nothing can separate us from the love of God.
Yeah.
Not death, not anything.
Nothing.
And connecting that with Jesus in Luke 21, some of you they will put to death.
Which sounds terrible.
But not a hair of your head will perish. How do those two things fit?
Through the lens of Romans 8.28, everything works together for your good. Even death itself, for the believer, is part of God working for their ultimate good.
So as the author puts it, when you die, you don't perish.
To die is gain.
Which makes the title make perfect sense. Doing missions when dying is gain.
Is the greatest life in the world. Because your hope isn't based on avoiding loss in this life.
Wow. And it wraps up by pointing back to Jesus' words again.
John 10.16. I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd.
Reinforcing that ongoing mission and its ultimate success. One flock, one shepherd.
The certainty remains.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the big themes are pretty clear. This unwavering certainty about God's global plan.
Based on his promises, his purchase, his glory, his sovereignty.
Right. And then the unavoidable cost that suffering is often part of the package, even a means to the end.
Yeah, that counterintuitive idea that suffering presents Christ's love.
And finally, the ultimate reward, the eternal perspective that makes it all worthwhile, even joyful amidst hardship.
Anchored in God's promises and presence.
We really hope this discussion gives you something to chew on, to reflect on how these ideas connect with your own sense of purpose, maybe sacrifice, your view of what lasts.
Yeah, definitely food for thought.
And maybe a provocative question to leave you with. What part of this deep dive most challenges your current understanding of what really matters?
That's a good one.
And if you want to dig deeper, definitely check out the Bible passages we mentioned, Hebrews, Romans, Colossians.
Or read more about people like the Moravians, Jim Elliot, Raymond Lull. Their lives speak volumes.
Absolutely. Well, we hope this has been insightful and maybe offers a richer perspective on life's ultimate mission, whatever your context.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.